Hello, everyone. We're here with Hiring for Good podcast discussing leadership and transformation and lessons learned along the way. I'm Tanis Morris, and I'm here with my trusted friend and co-host, Suzanne Hanifin.
Good morning.
And our guest today is Ryan Buchanan with Thesis. And I'm just going to say a few words about Ryan before we get going. So, Ryan's innate entrepreneurial and leadership talents have shaped his career. He has founded multiple companies. I was trying to count exactly how many. I'm not sure if we include companies and industry associations and board leadership positions and nonprofit board positions over decades. And he is also founder and chairman of Thesis, a digital marketing agency who has extensive experience representing nationally recognized brands. And in recent efforts, he has founded We Believe in Portland, which is a grassroots community organization dedicated to a vibrant and thriving Portland, our home city. And he also is founder of The Script, an agency or a social enterprise removing barriers for diverse, talented young people seeking their future in the workplace. Does that sum it up?
That's my
There's
bio.
A lot here.
I like how you've written and reframed my bio, so it's kind of nice. I was like, keep going.
All right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of content, and of course, we'll ask you to speak to a little bit about your background. So go ahead and flesh out what I said, and I'm anxious to hear, your delivery of this journey.
Well, and I'm going to throw in there, because this is a learning podcast, let us know those aha moments and what you've learned and what you would do different, possibly.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in suburbs of D.C. And fell in love with the Northwest in college. After my freshman year, I drove in my wood-paneled station wagon and worked as a night janitor at Glacier National Park at Lake McDonald Lodge. And then the next summer, a bunch of my buddies were a little jealous because that was such an adventurous, amazing summer. Not the cleaning out the deep fryers, but like everything else in Glacier, that we came out and worked at Black Butte Ranch. Again, not glorious job of like being a dishwasher or what have you, but just paradise. And fell in love, made a couple weekend trips to Portland, and knew I was going to end up there. So after I went to the University of Virginia, after college, moved out, I got a job as a financial analyst at Intel. Their reload package moved my two best buddies and me out here. Since we've all married older women, have two daughters who are now heading off to college, or mine are already both there, and still live close by and still super close. But yeah, and then so fast forward to leaving in early 2000 Intel and starting what was GC Materials, which was kind of like DocuSign meets Basecamp or some project management system or Airtable, what have you, for the construction industry. And I was at a pitch event. This is what Tanis and I were chatting before this. And I co-founded this entrepreneur kind of tough love support group called Starbups, not Starbucks, but Starbups. We were all starving startups, and our logo was a peanut butter that we could live off of, a jar of peanut butter for a long time.
I believe the tagline was operating on 90% less revenue than Bay Area companies or something.
We were scrappy. But a couple of the guys in that group were, I don't know if you met Leaf and Lars with Cooler Email, but we started. So the construction software company wasn't really working out great because it was way too far before its time. And I was, just stumbling along with that. And so I started reselling this email marketing software, a lot like MailChimp, just not as pretty, actually. And And we also had freelancers that would help branded email templates and tell that story. And so I really did a lot of networking in all these business associations in Portland. And so I got quite networked with a ton of CEOs and marketers to start and started a company called Email ROI that became eROI. That then finally 5 years ago we named it that with a real name, Thesis, that had more meaning to it. And so we really grew in the small to mid-sized business place, and it was through Starbucks that it really kind of was able to use that as a platform to grow. And then some major milestones of like almost business death failure of trying to become a software company ourselves. And over the course of a couple years, realizing that $1.5 million investment was not going to work. And so when I officially pulled the plug on that effort, we went from 41 employees down to about 12. And a lot of that wasn't layoff. It was just, people saw the writing on the wall. The culture became toxic. And I was, perceived as a pretty smart leader before. And then I was now like the dumbest CEO on the planet for allowing that to fail. And I started to have many panic attacks. I had tasted iron in the back of my throat, almost had a heart attack, all this stuff. And I had to pay the bank back $500,000, right? And so and pay investors back and all this stuff. So it took 5 years to dig out of that hole. And we went back to being much more transparent about being a digital agency and licensing software instead of representing it as ourselves. And then a couple years after that low point, didn't have a heart attack, survived. I used LinkedIn is a beautiful tool. Yeah. And so a friend, actually one of my sister's close friends, I saw through LinkedIn that he was in a pivotal spot at Nike and that he was even in Portland. So just, kind of struck, hey, you're like, let's hang out. And that led to us becoming pretty quickly Nike's email agency of record. And since then we've grown significantly there, and we're now almost 300 employees. And we pivoted from having 300 plus small to mid-size business clients to having about a dozen that Nike, Taco Bell, Spotify, a lot of major global consumer brands, Adobe and a few others. And then the other key milestone to bring up, and then we'll get to your questions, is I was at a business event that I wasn't hosting, but 90 business owners in the room, a lot of them my friends, again, from doing all the networking, and something that seems so obvious in retrospect, but it really hit me about half hour into this important event. I look around the room, and 85 of us are white men, and 3 women and 2 men of color. And I was like, a voice coming to me and was like, you are part of the problem, a big part of the problem, because I had not used my network. I hadn't been intentional about creating relationships in communities of color, and really there was just no intentionality. So my company, like most companies, not only in Portland, but in every city, reflect the comfortable networks that we have, and not the, intentional, like life-giving, learning networks that we could have if we were more intentional. And so I wrote a blog post called Business Portland, Portland Business Community, 2 white, 2 male. And the effort was, I had gone to a friend of mine a guy named Ben Sand, and a few months later, one of my entrepreneur friends, Sue Embry, joined as co-founding this nonprofit called The Script, where that blog post was basically a call to action to CEOs of like, hey, why don't you participate in this program? Thought we'd get like maybe a half dozen, and we had 35 companies sign up that first summer. And since then, we place about anywhere from 100 to 150 college. So we've placed over the past 8 years 860 college students and recent college grads of color at 150 Portland companies. So, and that's led to some really rich relationships, close friendships. And the last thing I'd say on that is I launched about 5 months ago a entrepreneurs, CEOs of color small group called Blueprint Founder Circle, focused on building generational wealth. And we have folks like Rakaya Adams and Alice Tang come in as guest speakers and just really foster really a sense of empowerment and how do we build value not only in our company's real estate and the things that make up wealth, but shift our mindset and support one another as we grow our businesses. So it's been an awesome journey, and here we are at Thesis. I guess the last main point is a couple years ago, I shifted things over to my now business partner, a woman named Keely York, who is now CEO of Thesis, been around for 22 years, but she's really been instrumental in way more skilled operationally than I am. We have a good chemistry. She's just has incredible business intuition and is like can read a room well. Is a little skeptical of certain situations where I'm like this annoying optimist. So we have this good balance that meets in the middle, and so I think she's been a big part of why we've grown so much recently. And then the last thing I'd say is that we moved into this 40,000 square foot mass timber, beautiful building that we want to be the hub of community. So we partner with a lot of other events. We've had our We Believe in Portland after party with a couple hundred people there, and moved into that building 5 months ago on the edge of Slabtown. Okay.
Wonderful.
I think that is amazing. And again, talk about this journey and lessons. You were at an ultimate low. And really, you said it took 5 years to kind of pay it off and to keep building. Talk to me about other formative lessons you've learned, because that's a huge learning to go from 40 employees, you said, down to 12.
Yep. Yeah.
And now 300.
Yeah. So I did kind of a top 10 list of learning from failure. And I actually really enjoyed talking about failure because it was so painful. At least I can have some nuggets to talk about and not like just drown in my tears. But the biggest lesson is be careful who your heroes are. And that is like when we shifted to become more of a software company, I looked to build my board, and I looked at a lot of like really successful software entrepreneurs whose values didn't align with mine at all, but I was so enamored with their business success that so I just, looked up to these folks who scaled these, big, companies and all of that. And then I didn't really take stock in like, oh, they got divorced right after they sold their company. They they just did a lot of immoral things, like things like that. And, that isn't, it just created it. I realized instead of like looking up to not only folks within my network, but also the Steve Jobs of the world and all of that, like really my heroes are more people like my dad, like my mom, who are entrepreneurs who just, were in it for the long haul. They just have really, really strong values, and they built community all along the way. So really my goal has always been to, use Thesis as a platform for good in the community. And that's what, with We Believe in Portland, with the script, I can be so much more successful attached to my company and, inspire and influence 300 employees to role model it for the city rather than sell the company and be just another, not, I don't want to paint the picture of like all like, middle-aged white men who sell their companies are then depressed, but like, I just would
I think there's actually a pretty high statistic. You're not off.
Yeah. But just I just think that there's real power in the long-term commitment to community and to place and to people, to lift them up and inspire a city. But also my goal and in my life now is really to try to be more behind the scenes, more on boards, and like, you have other people lead the way and me to be kind of a right behind the scenes. Doesn't always work out like that with We Believe in Portland and stuff like that. But I'm trying to find someone to like, be out in front. So anyway, it's a work in progress.
Well, and it's interesting because in recruiting, we talk about this match between values and cultures and goals. And as an employer, if those are off, it doesn't last a long, the longevity's not there. That's interesting that you brought it up for board members because, again, it is that relationship, that critical relationship has to be there, and that alignment.
I mean, it's power structures too, right? So, yeah, and I think CEOs are the limiting factor of the health and growth of companies, and as one gains more self-awareness, for example, one of my weaknesses is when I was CEO, I would allow often newer execs manage up really well to me and so I was fooled that they were doing a good job when really their teams were suffering, and because they weren't managing their teams well. And sometimes the values alignment was off. So sometimes it's hard in a podcast when you're listening of like getting generic, you need to communicate better. You need to have values alignment. It's hard to see that when you're in it.
Yeah.
So it has been helpful to step back a little bit from, well, I'm not in the day-to-day at all, but you can see things more clearly when you're not, because I so love people. I can just look past certain things and focus on their, what I really love about someone. But their teams, can suffer when that happens. So I'm trying to get more self-aware. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's really interesting hearing you so humbly speak about some of the areas that you've experienced, opportunities for growth or that have been challenging or even dark times. Everybody goes through that really, and those are where we learn. You already kind of touched on it without us even asking you, but when you go through these experiences, they really crystallize what your values are. So at Thesis, and then on the boards that you sit on, what are the personal values that you hold that you try to instill in the organizations you participate with?
Yeah, I think one of the ones that, again, I think it's more instinctively, Keely's role modeled it really, really well, and I've gotten better at it, still not quite as good as her at it, is having healthy conflict, like having hard conversations with grace. I think as humans, and especially Portland nice, like there's a lot of, trying hard to be nice when that doesn't benefit. It really exacerbates and allows for a situation to build up and get worse versus like nipping it in the bud and just calling it out. And especially in a creative agency where your product is your people, and a lot of sometimes in an agency atmosphere, it becomes a lot of feelings management instead of like how is this helping the company and how is this helping our clients? And so there's a balance there of empathy, balance with accountability, and that serves everyone well. So don't know if I fully answered your question, but I just think that one value, I think, is one that we're trying to put as much effort into as possible.
And so when you're looking about building teams and expanding beyond your mission, what's the approach and how do you take those values to scale and to operationalize?
So, I mean, one of the if you go to our website at Thesis, we're really trying to highlight the humans behind the work, and a lot of times, agencies across the country, I think the averages is like it's 88% white employees, and yet the consumers that we serve, the country's going to be a minority majority in the next 15 years. So our project teams should reflect the consumers that we serve, and they don't. And so we really want to highlight the people making the work and get the human. Oftentimes, the best marketing message that comes out is the origin story of that company, of where that product is really coming from, the people behind it. So anyway, I got lost on that one thought. I don't think I fully answered your question.
Well, previous to starting this podcast, you said that in your industry, it's a 2-year longevity of employment.
Yeah, there's a lot of turnover.
Right. Mm. So when you're looking at building teams, and especially on your leadership team, matching who your customers are, that's important. But what other aspects do you bring in when you are hiring?
So our industry is going through a tough time, like especially in Portland. You probably saw Wyden and Kennedy did massive layoffs, Instrument, and a few others. We've had to do some small adjustments with workforce reduction, but have made some adjustments and communicated really transparently along the way. I think, when we're in that tough spot from an executive standpoint, hiring executives who've been through hard things. There's a book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I mean, it's much more helpful because otherwise, if someone hasn't been through a tough thing like a layoff or what have you, it's going to be such a shock to the system that they likely aren't going to stick around long. I'm giving you very topical things of like in the moment, and I'm realizing that I'm really focusing on the hard things. But I think that we went through a pandemic, and then business-wise, certain industries like our company actually really benefited. We tripled in size in 2 years. In 21 and 22. And then at the end of 22, it was like, wow, we went from hiring 175 people per year for 2 years to like, we got caught up in the lack of accountability and not being close to maybe our more mid-level managers that were saying we need to hire more and more and more because our people are overworked, when in fact the data didn't really support that. And so that's why I'm getting to this place where they're not only within Thesis, but I mentioned other agencies, and then I'm actually a judge for Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award, and so across the whole Mountain West states. And so I have like 70 different data points of applications of the best companies, like all really going through hard things in 23, and then still uncertainty in the first half of this year. So I really value executives who've been through hard things.
Well, and you mentioned 3 big core values, and I'm going to repeat them. As you take this approach of scaling, growing, or right-sizing your organization. And you mentioned empathy a few times.
Sure.
Transparency and accountability. And those are big topics and hard words to operationalize.
Right.
But when you're looking at these 70 Ernst & Young Entrepreneurs of the Year, do you take those type of qualities, and is that part of the measurement, or is it just on revenue and scale?
I mean, it's half and half.
It is.
Look at, my takeaway is looking at these applications and all these executive teams doing the hard things, but it may not show up in the financial numbers for several years because it takes a while to for that to turn around the bottom line. But we, not only within organizations, but I think city governments and cascaded throughout the country, there was this, initially with the pandemic is we're all going to die. And then it's like, okay, we're going to live. But we have to drastically change how we work. And I think hybrid in terms of remote versus in-person work is like the future. But I just think, and especially for those of us who have a lot of 20s and 30-somethings employees, I think learning what accountability really looks like is a really tough process to go through. And I think we're in that right now across all organizations.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. Well, our last question that we ask is, what does hiring for good mean to you?
So a huge part of our values, we're a B Corp, and we believe that business is a force for good, which we've also gotten the positive affirmation that new employees like seek us out, and our existing employees like really appreciate that we have a third party like B Corp, kind of validate that, not only of how we treat our people, but how we show up for the planet and all of that. But yeah, I just think hiring for good is, I'm going to try really hard to not give the platitude, but it is like the values alignment that is, are employees going to show up to volunteer? Are they, but also are they going to be motivated to show up for clients? And if there are some setbacks with their cat getting sick or what have you, that they're not going to take the month off like they might have, I'm exaggerating, but when in 2020. So I think hiring for good is just hiring really well-balanced employees and executives who are, willing to do the hard things, but then show up for their community and get outside of the office walls to engage in community efforts. So that's what it means to me. I think it can mean a ton of things to different people, but I love that you're planting the seed of, thoughts become things. And so if you're having all these interviews with different execs, to think about every hire that they make is how am I hiring for good? I think that's a good reminder.
Well, and I'm going to ask one more question if I can, because you've had such a journey and ups and downs. What advice would you have given your 20-year-old self?
I think it's the ups and the downs are all part of it. And I think it's all a gift, especially in retrospect, because when you're going through it, it is not a gift. It is pain. But Yeah, I don't think I'd do anything differently because it's all led me to where I am. So
I love that. What a great journey.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Ryan.
me.
It was such a pleasure. We just really, I knew this was going to be a really interesting interview, and you did not disappoint.
Well,
It's
thank
wonderful.
you.
Some great takeaways, and I think for our audience as well. So
Yes.
Appreciate
you.
it. All right. Thanks. Yep.
Thanks for joining us today at Hiring for Good. If you were inspired by our conversation, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to learn more about our executive search services, check us out at www.hiringforgood.net or our company website, Acumen Executive Search.
Thanks so much, and don't forget to join us next time for another in-depth conversation about transformational leadership. Until then, have fun.